Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Team Venom comic show. I'm your host, Rory Bailey, joined by Bret Juliano, the author and artist for the Bunny Mafia saga, which is featuring based on a true story, Volume 1, which I picked up the other day, which is quite good. And you've currently got Volume 3 in Kickstarter phase, I believe. So, how's it going, Bret?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. Firstly, how did your um, sorry, let me start again. And with these comic strips being based on true stories of organized crime, are you worried about any comebacks, and how did you decide to go down that route?
Well, nowadays, I feel like organized crime is pretty well just things of like podcasts and history.
Okay,
There's not a lot of, um, in the news headline organized crime, at least here in America. I
okay,
know uh, out in Italy, there's still a very heavy organized crime presence. Um, but like I'm based in Chicago, and Chicago used to be one of the big centers of organized crime. And it's been at least 10 years since there was a big organized crime scandal
okay,
that was, kind of prosecuted. So at this point, from the people that I've talked to and the different things, I'm doing a lot of historical, uh, material in my comics. So I'm not really worried about pushback.
okay, cool. What made you want to go that route for them?
Um, well, part of it was just my love of history. I started the Dust Bunny Mafia because I was actually sitting in traffic and I saw DBM on a license plate when I was working a day job. And I was like, what could DBM stand for? This was, almost 10 years ago. And I didn't, sitting in traffic, had 2 hours to go on my commute. And I'm like, what could that stand for? And I thought Dust Bunny Mafia. And I'm like, quick. So I found, a little piece of paper. I jotted that down. And then by the time I had gotten home, I had kind of envisioned the main Dust Bunny Mafia family in my head. And then I had been doing this kind of web comic for a couple years. And when I moved out to Chicago, it was kind of this let's get involved in the local culture, see what kind of local history comes up. And I mean, I knew moving to Chicago, Al Capone is like the number one name when you talk about organized crime. Um, but as I started doing more and more research, and the neighborhood that I live at is called Oak Park, and it used to be one of the big places that mobsters throughout the years kind of settled down because it was the first city outside of the Chicago city limits, the first suburb. And so it was outside the big jurisdiction. Um, and I started to get fascinated with these kind of true stories um, from where I was living. And I'm like, I could work, some of these things are completely ridiculous. And I wouldn't ever think that real people did this. It wasn't just, Hollywood dreaming up these schemes. And so I was like, well, let's, see if I can adapt some of them with my characters. And then I started putting them out there, and my fans just kind of went crazy for them. And so I had a great response, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to keep going with this, see where it goes.
Ah, cool. Well, I've read Volume 1 because you were very kind to send me the PDF of that over prior to this, so thoroughly enjoyed it. It's a nice little format for them as well. Um, what can you tell us about your process when creating them? How did you go about designing the characters and that sort of thing?
So originally with the characters, I mean, I based it off kind of the old school Looney Tunes, the classic, uh, you know, Tex Avery comics, and the ones that were like that we grew up, with, and our parents grew up with. And I always loved that animation style. And so I wanted to create, when I created my world, follow the similar style, but I was also heavily influenced by newspaper strips. And so I was like, I'm going to tell mine in the newspaper format, but then I want these character designs kind of based on Looney Tunes. And so, and that's kind of um, my kind of pitch when I'm talking about it is that it's Looney Tunes meets The Godfather. So like doing, mafia stories, but a lot of the violence is slapstick or off screen. So, there's nothing gory unless it's like smashing a coffee bean and pieces are flying everywhere. Um, and so I used, you know, basically the golden era of cartoons as kind of the basis for the characters. And then I said, okay, if I'm doing dust bunnies, they're these little, microscopic, clumps of, dust. Everything in my world originally was going to be the size of a ruler or smaller. And so I was like, everything needs to be, the biggest thing I had originally was a crow. And I'm like, so I started going into like this micro world and said, all right, if I'm going to have different mobster families, what's something that would be, a pest? And so I thought of mice. And so I've got rats as one of the other crews. I've got the crows. So I've got all these microorganisms that are, um, for the most part, the basis of the story. But then as I've developed into some other things, like doing the based on true story, I've started to integrate some larger characters uh, for one-offs and different things that kind of go with the Looney Tunes thing, where you can have, a rabbit that's as tall as Elmer Fudd or taller, and no one questions it. It's a cartoon, and that's what it is. And so originally I was pretty strict in my everything needs to be this size or smaller. And then as I've kind of grown with it, I've kind of loosened up on that a bit.
Ah, fair enough. Um, so volume one's out, and I believe volume three's in the Kickstarter phase right now, isn't it? What can you tell us about the actual Kickstarter campaign?
So yeah, volume one, I originally kickstarted back in 2019, and it was my first foray into Kickstarter, and it went well. And so last year, when the pandemic happened and we were all, forced to work from home, I was like, well, I have extra time on my hands. I have an extra at least 2 hours a day that I don't have to dedicate to a commute. So I've got more time for drawing and reading and everything. So I was working on, because that's one of my passions, is finding the real life stories. And so as I was reading more, I'm like, oh, I've got enough here for another collection. Let's go to Kickstarter. And so in September of last year, I kickstarted volume two um, successfully. And then now, as you just mentioned, volume three is live. It will be running until about 9 a.m. Chicago time on Monday, May 17th, in which this collection, we are currently overfunded and working on stretch goals. So
Wow.
it's going to be a 40-page booklet that's half sheet size. So this is volume two, which contains 36 or so comics in it, with a intro by a true crime author. And volume three is going to be that same way. We just unlocked the extra 8 pages to make it a 40-page booklet. And currently have a couple of other stretch goals lined up, but I've got, stories from all sorts of mobsters to, talking about Vegas, to FBI pranks that they would pull on mobsters, and, got everything from physical rewards to digital rewards, which are, especially helpful to supporting people, overseas, that, sometimes shipping is as much as the book itself.
Yeah. Well, as I thoroughly, I'll get my words out properly in a minute. I thoroughly enjoyed volume one, having a read through that. And you mentioned that volume two was successfully kickstarted in September, with volume three ending next week. Have you got plans for volume four and five or such, or is three where you're going to be capping it off, or what's the future hold for the series?
So, I mean, as things continue to progress, and as long as people keep supporting them and keep buying them, I'm, at least for the foreseeable future, I plan to continue them. At this point, I may actually, instead of volume 4 coming next, I may collect volume 1, 2, and 3 into like a trade paperback, like a more, official book collection that would actually have a real spine to it and everything, in which I have 2 other comic collections that are outside of based on a true story that are full size, like the Calvin and Hobbes Garfield style collections. And so, but plan is to collect 1, 2, and 3 and do some extra artwork and different things to kind of fill it out to one of that size, which would be, easily 100 pages or more. And so that's probably the plan for the next installment. And then afterwards, if people continue to, support that series, then I would, go then back to booklet for 4, 5, and 6, or however much, till I run out of stories.
Fair enough. Well, it's been thoroughly enjoyable reading them, and it's been great chatting to you, and it's nice to hear where your influences come from. Is there an official website for the Kickstarter or anything like that that any of our viewers or listeners can pick up and go to?
I have a short link, but it's
That's fine. I can drop it in the description. That's not a problem if it's
Yeah.
all.
I have it. It's just
I'm not familiar with Kickstarter myself, you see, so I don't know how well all their domains work, and but yeah, so we'll stick that in the description. So if you're watching this or listening to it on iTunes or anything like that, please check out the description. There'll be the link to your Kickstarter. But yeah, thank you very much. It's been great chatting to you, and I hope everything goes well with Kickstarter, with your Volume 3 Kickstarter.
Thanks, and thanks for having me on.